This is You and Yours, introduced by Joan Yorke. Hello. Today we look at the day-to-day routine of a typical fire brigade. We've a report on the work carried out by one of Britain's textile research centres, and we examine the problems of a group of people who are less than happy with their working conditions. Not the miners this time, but the teachers. But first, some of your reactions to the fuel crisis. M. Hodgkinson writes from London N12.
May I appeal to all cyclists and the parents of the younger ones to see that they have lights working according to the regulations. Many cyclists are lax about this, and it's especially important during a blackout for their own safety and the safety of others.
Mrs. J.D. Duke of Guildford suggests,
to conserve use of electricity at peak hours, spread the load by timing water heaters to come on before 6 a.m. A well-lagged tank will stay hot.
That's all very well if you've got a timing device on your water heater. And of course we are being asked to conserve water now, aren't we? A bitter question from J. Bellington of Northampton.
Now that welfare departments are serving and delivering dinners to families of striking miners because they cannot manage on social security, can we soon expect the same service for those of us who have to live on social security? I refer, of course, to the chronic sick, disabled, widowed, pensioners and unemployed. We have to live on the benefits permanently. The miners do have jobs to go to.
And we've had several other letters saying much the same thing. Meanwhile, we've all got to cope with the situation as best as we can. Donna MacDonald, a housewife, came in to tell us how she organises the housework when she's blacked out every 3 hours.
My husband thinks that every time there's a power cut, we should go to a film in some other part of town not affected by the blackout. But as a housewife, I find that jobs like bed making and dusting, which keep you on the move, and therefore warm, are perfect for power cuts. I've found that the water in my immersion heater will stay hot throughout a 3-hour power cut, which means dishes and hand laundry get done towards the end of a power cut, when I want that extra warmth. The best time for jobs like vacuuming and ironing is just after the power has come back on. You've got the electricity to run the appliances then, but both jobs keep you moving and warm while the house heats up again. It's also worth remembering that the shops will be open whether or not there's electricity, so you may as well do your shopping during a power cut. Probably the most difficult period for many families to cope with will be the 6 to 9 cut-off. But even if you can count on a romantic candlelight dinner to occupy some of this time, what about the rest of it? Of course, if you're one of those marvellous ladies who can knit without looking at the work, you can produce sweaters the family will no doubt be grateful for. Not to advertise, but there are plays and programs on the radio. Since youngsters may not be able to do homework during a blackout, it might also be a good time for spelling bees, arithmetic exercises and the like. Also, if there's hot water left in the tank and a warm bed to get into, there's no reason why you or the children can't have a bath. And if the dark makes you a bit depressed, you can always think how much lower your next electricity bill was going to be.
Yesterday, the teachers got nowhere with their pay claim. They want nearly 14% and have been offered only 6%. But it's not just more money they want. They also want smaller classes and a bigger say in the policy decisions which affect their schools. Both these subjects were discussed at a press conference held by the National Union of Teachers this morning. David Belland talked to Fred Jarvis, who's their Deputy General Secretary, and asked him how he thought teachers could participate more in the running of their schools.
Basically, our aim is to enable teachers to share in the decision-making on those aspects of the life of a school that affect the work of the whole staff. In other words, what we're saying, that teachers are professionals, and they have a right to have a say in major matters of policy because they've got to carry the policy out. At the moment, the head teacher makes the decisions. He may consult, he may not. Having consulted, he may ignore what his colleague said, he may accept it. One doesn't know, it varies. And what we're saying is that teaching now and the work of a school is basically a team effort, and by participation we mean enabling all the staff to have a voice in the determination of policy.
Well, obviously they can't all have a voice in everything, otherwise the whole thing would be a shambles. So what are the chief areas in which you see them participating?
I think it is the main matters of school life, the general balance of the curriculum and allocation of resources within the school, its relations with parents and the community at large. These, I think, are the key areas, and these are the things that affect the teacher's work most, obviously. The matters about the curriculum, the subjects that are going to be studied, the amount of money available for the different subjects and teachers and so on. These are vital matters, and it's on these that we would expect there to be a sharing of decision-making.
This does exist, though, to some extent, does it already?
Well, you do have in some schools, the heads do consult. There are staff councils, but on the whole, they are consultative. They can submit advice to the head, or the head can seek their advice, but he's not obliged to accept it, because under the legal framework in which the schools operate, the head has the responsibilities. We don't want to get rid of head teachers. We're saying that although we're going to have a more democratic structure as we see it, there would still be a need for a head teacher or an executive officer, people who carry out the decisions. We're not going to get rid of them, but at the moment the head is not obliged to accept the advice of his colleagues at all.
How would the decisions be taken? Would they simply vote?
I think that if it came to that, yes, one would hope that as far as possible you'd work by consensus, but if it's not possible to reach general agreement, then there may be issues where you do take a vote. I mean, this happens already in the colleges of education and further education. They have academic boards where these matters are discussed and sometimes votes are taken. But on the whole, I think after discussion, and it may be time-consuming, there would be a general agreement. But if necessary, you'd take a vote.
How much resistance is there to this on the part of headmasters and governing bodies and so on?
Well, I don't know yet. It's very much a first effort. This report from our working party is going to our annual conference. We've had a resolution in favouring the general idea of this sort of development. But until we get to the conference with a detailed report of the kind that we've got now, one can't tell how much within the NUT it will be accepted. I think, broadly speaking, this is a realistic report. It will be accepted by our members, and I think a lot of heads do recognise already, and in practice, are consulting and working with their colleagues, and often are proceeding by agreement with them, because the life of a school, certainly of large secondary schools in particular, is now so complex that the head couldn't do it all on his own anyway.
Would you like to see it happening in all schools, whatever sort of school?
Yes, we're not saying that this is a matter only for big secondary schools. We're saying that in all schools, irrespective of their size, there is a need for an involvement of all the teaching staff. But the machinery by which you achieve this would vary. In a big school, you'd have to have subcommittees, you'd have to have a council, and basically there'll be some delegation of discussion. In a small school, all the staff could come together. And of course, in some small schools, this already happens fairly frequently anyway. The major difference that would occur if our proposals are ultimately accepted is that, having had the staff discuss these matters, the head would be expected to carry out the decisions reached by the staff as a whole.
So if you put this through, obviously the teachers would benefit. What about the pupils at the schools?
I think in terms of the general atmosphere in a school, it ought to improve. There'll be greater job satisfaction on the part of the teachers as a whole, less frustration, because they feel that they're not just carrying out somebody's policy, whether they agree with it or not. They will have had a share in shaping the policy. And I think this should lead to a better atmosphere and educationally to a more efficient school. I don't see anything incompatible with efficiency and democracy. It may take a little more time, but I think the general atmosphere will be improved as a result of people feeling that they count as professionals along with their colleagues.
Fred Jarvis of the National Union of Teachers. Well, we all need teachers at some stage in our lives, but we always hope it's other people who will need such services as the fire brigade, for instance, though we recognise that they're vital to us all. Tim Matthews reports on the mixture of routine and emergency, which makes up a fireman's life.
Fire brigade, can I help you? 1-4, Wheatsheaf Close. Yes, right, we'll be right along, sir.
An emergency call is received at the headquarters of the Kent Fire Brigade. It's relayed to the nearest station at Maidstone. The call in this case is fortunately not too serious, a small chimney fire. It was taken by Sub-Officer Geoffrey Cooper and his watch, who had been spending the earlier part of the morning training on the drill tower at the rear of the station.
Right, John! On the right to the left in 5, number! 1, 2, 3, 4. Who's number? 1. Number 1 crew, rear of the water tender ladder, forward, in! Number 1! Slip and pitch the 45-foot alloy ladder to the 2nd floor. Line of hose to work, supplementing from a hydrant. Any questions?
How many hours each morning would you spend on this sort of training?
I usually consider to spend 2 hours a morning on this sort of more physical type training, and probably an hour in the afternoon on lecturing or a less direct form of training, fire prevention, lecturing, visits, this sort of work.
The firemen moved from the drill tower to a lecture hall, where a post-mortem was held on an incident the previous night. At 1:06 they had attended a fire in a nearby factory. The fire had been flaming through the roof as they arrived. They had to cut through the fence because the gateway was padlocked. Sub-Officer Cooper asked who set into the hydrant at the corner of Beaconsfield Road. It was me, said Fireman Brooker.
It was a nice 6-inch hydrant. We knew it was quite capable of giving 2 good working jets. So we simply conveyed hose from the hydrant to the back of the water tender ladder, giving 2 good working jets.
Right, now whilst the water tender ladder was setting in to the hydrant, someone was taking the first line of hose into the burning factory. Who had the first line of hose?
I did.
Fireman Neil, yeah? Any problems?
We couldn't get into the building immediately because the asbestos was exploding, and it was a bit dangerous first of all, but after a very short time we managed to effect entry into the building.
Lessons are learnt from past experience, but better still that the fire should never have started in the first place. In their attempts to prevent fires before they start, Sub-Officer Cooper and his colleagues spent as much time as possible visiting private houses and giving advice. Still on radio call, we went round with an appliance to a suburban street.
Do you have any waste from that boiler, any ashes or anything like that?
No, it's oil fired,
It's
so
oil
we
fired,
don't have to
right.
worry about that.
Do you have the installation inspected fairly regularly as regards to site?
Yes, we have. We've got a maintenance contract and they come every year.
Is there anything you'd like to ask me now, Mrs. Wells? We've worked through that. Anything you feel unsure about?
There's just one thing. We do keep some methylated spirits in a bottle in a cupboard in the kitchen. I don't know whether that is safe kept like that or whether we should keep it outside perhaps.
Well, ideally it should be stored outside. Although it's only a small quantity you've got, it should ideally be stored outside because methylated spirits is a volatile liquid and as such is still dangerous. So ideally it should be kept, say, in your garage or something like that, and out of the hands of, I see you've got young children, out of the reach of children, because things can happen.
One of the main causes of fires in the home is letting small children play with matches. Sub-Officer Cooper told me another danger point at home is the kitchen.
The sort of things that we find in kitchens are using gloss paint on expanded polystyrene ceiling tiles, overloaded electrical circuits, and of course the old favourite, our friend the chip pan. A small chip pan fire, I don't think a lot of people realise, a small chip pan fire would produce such a dickens of a lot of smoke. Maybe necessitate the entire ground floor of the house being redecorated. Never fill a chip pan more than a third to a half full, and the best way of putting one out if it does overheat is to turn the heat off, remove it from the heat and place the lid on.
With admiring children running in our wake, we left the residential area and moved off towards a factory. There, even I, the layman, could see that the place was a high fire risk, with loose wood shavings lying everywhere, inflammable material in huge, untidy piles. Geoffrey Cooper said he was glad it was as close to the fire station as it was, as we stood in one large warehouse.
You notice that we're standing right by a block of foam, which must be every bit of, 7 feet by 7 feet square, probably by about 2 feet deep. It wouldn't burn particularly well, but it's not the fire that we're worried about with this type of material, it's the fumes which we give off. In fact, I was reading to my watch only the other week a report about the fumes that this stuff gives off and how it has affected some firemen down in the West Country, I believe, so badly that they've had to be invalided out of the service.
And what can you do? You just offer advice, can you? Or can you do anything stronger than that?
Now, on certain things, we are empowered to insist that they are done, such as exits being closed, exits being wedged open, this sort of thing. But general housekeeping, by and large, I'm afraid it's generally a matter of advice and persuasion.
Tim Matthews with the Fire Brigade. Next, what's on your mind? Letters go on coming in from parents who feel strongly that slow learners, that's to say children at a normal school who are slow in learning to read, shouldn't be left to their own devices. Here's one from Mrs. A.D. Teague of Blackawton, Devon.
I'm entirely on the side of the mother who taught her slow learner little boy to read at home to help him on. All this nonsense about waiting till 8+ to see if he has a thing about words, when he was so obviously a normal child, leaves me quite cold, alternatively makes my blood boil. Look what a lot that child would have missed if he'd had to wait till the teachers decided that after 8 he was of an age to begin to look into the problem. The fact that he did learn to read with his mother just confounds all this present-day teaching outlook.
Mrs. Smith of Oxted, a mother of 4, had taught her slow one herself, and says that she simply had to write us a few hasty lines.
Please, please don't be tempted to leave your child until he's 8 before worrying that he can't read. By then he will be backward in sums, history, geography, and will probably have closed his mind to learning altogether. The periods at school when he should have been reading will have been spent daydreaming, and the prospect of learning to read the babyish books which are considered suitable at 5 years of age simply won't appeal to him.
From M. Jackson of Feltham, Middlesex.
What a pity the teacher thought the child should be 7 or 8 before anyone needed to worry about his ability to read. In my opinion, children should be encouraged, not pressurised, to read at a very early age, before school if possible. Teachers with classes of 40 or so cannot be expected to give individual help to the less able. This should be done at home.
And a teacher, Deborah Hay of London W8, seems to agree with these parents.
Once a child falls behind with the skills of reading and writing, he needs to be helped as soon as possible, the more he has to catch up. It has its own snowball effect. If the child hasn't formed the skill of reading or writing comparable with his own age, he not only has to catch up, but has lost out slightly on the polish and confidence of his contemporaries.
The subject we had the other day, pensioners and British rail fare concessions, is picked up by L.M. Brown of London SE12.
What is all this nonsense about British railways and pensioners? Pensioners should be entitled to half fare, whatever the section of British Rail, any time of the day, any day of the week. Nobody in their right mind would travel in the rush hour without good cause.
A pithy comment from Mrs. E. Anderson of Beckenham on a complaint we had the other day.
Please tell the gentleman who had to buy 3 notebooks in a pack instead of 1 he's really the winner, since next time he wants a notebook the price will have gone up. He will then be 2 to the good.
And a suggestion, in more serious vein, to help people get value for money, from E. Dickinson of St. Leonards-on-Sea.
Referring to the use of new pence and shopping, I wish something could be done to improve things in connection with the following. Many elderly people, although able to use the new coins, cannot assess their value, and actually think the new pence have the same value as the old penny, and cannot understand why their money seems to go so quickly. If shop owners would only make a point of showing the old money price in brackets under the new pence price, whenever prices are marked, it would be a great help. Why is it that one never sees or hears of increases in prices by half a p or a penny as it used to be? This practice by the trade of ignoring the new halfpenny means we have to pay a minimum of 2d or 3d in the old money as the smallest increase now made.
And finally, a query from Mrs. Margaret Barrett of Kingston in Surrey.
I wonder if any of your listeners are experiencing the menace of sales pressure by telephone in the evenings. Several times I've been pestered after 8 at night by different companies trying to interest me in their central heating systems. Surely the woman at home during the day has enough with doorstep salesmen. Must we now have our evenings interrupted too?
Let me remind you, by the way, of the address to which you should write your letters: to you and yours, BBC, Broadcasting House, London, W1A 1AA. In the quiet Manchester suburb of Didsbury is one of Britain's leading textile research organisations, the Shirley Institute. What are its current projects, and how do they affect you? Audrey Kay put this question to the head of the Textile Products Division, Dr. Kurt Greenwood.
People buy a garment in a shop and it's supposed to be washable, and they put it in the wash and it loses its colour. Or perhaps it is a laminate that is a fabric made up from 2 layers of fabric stuck together, and perhaps they send it to the dry cleaner and the two layers come apart, which they shouldn't do. These are the sort of problems that people come across, and if they don't get satisfaction from the supplier, they consult us.
Surprisingly homely questions to be tackled by this very large, very sophisticated, very authoritative organisation whose main work is to solve the really difficult problems of the textile industry. Take the case of the carpets that can give you an electric shock.
This problem of static electricity in carpets is one which has become a little bit more widely appreciated in recent years for two reasons. One is that more and more man-made fibres are used in carpets, such as nylon or acrylics, and these fibres are poor conductors of electricity. The second factor is the more widespread use of central heating. Now, what happens with carpets, or at least with certain types of carpets, is that when you walk over them, you build up quite a high voltage on your body. It can be several thousand volts. And when you then touch a metallic object, such as any kitchen utensil or a filing cabinet or something like that, you get a shock. Now, this is not a serious shock. It doesn't usually represent a danger to life and limb, but it is a nuisance. But for the average housewife who buys a carpet, it's well worth inquiring, at least in the shop, whether the particular carpet she wants to buy is in fact one which is liable to give her such shocks.
Will it have some sort of seal on for her to look out for, or will she have to rely on the shopkeeper?
Well, at the moment there's no such seal because there's not yet an agreed method for testing carpets. At the moment she'll have to rely mainly on the shopkeeper to advise her on that.
I then asked Dr. Greenwood what other studies had been done to help us in our choice of carpets.
We have done quite a lot of studies on for instance, on the amount of fuel that you save when you put a carpet in the home. And this is quite appreciable. Very often people are put off from buying a more expensive carpet simply because of the amount of money they have to spend. But what they tend to forget is that they also save money in terms of their electricity or gas bill.
Work to keep us warm in our homes, comparatively easy compared with the task of keeping Chris Bonington warm on his expedition to the Himalayas.
The main problem there is to combine comfort and protection. It's comparatively easy to protect a person against cold and against rain. But what isn't so easy is to do this in such a way that at the same time he can indulge in fairly strenuous exercise, as mountaineers do, and remain comfortable, which means essentially that the sweat that develops on the skin can evaporate. And I think some of the work that we are doing currently on this kind of clothing should ultimately lead to a better combination between comfort and protection, not only for exceptional people like mountaineers, but for the ordinary person, for instance, wearing an anorak or a raincoat.
A particularly important breakthrough has been made in protecting us against clothes that catch fire easily.
We've just completed a very long and extensive project for the Home Office to design realistic test methods, because it was found in the past that the tests which were done in the laboratory did not necessarily give an accurate picture of how the fabric or the garment would behave in an actual situation. But we think that the tests we have developed now, after about 3 years of very intensive work, are indeed reliable and will lead to much more stringent and, one hopes, much safer standards in this sort of item.
Dr. Kurt Greenwood of the Shirley Institute talking to Audrey Kay. I gave our address earlier in the programme, but do remember that if you want to give us a ring and dictate a letter to our dictating machine, and dictate it slowly, please, the number is 01 for those living outside London, 580 4468, extension 3030. For tomorrow, we'll be looking at intestacy. That's what happens to your money and or your possessions, if you have any, if you don't leave a will. And we've a report on industrial accidents, not the sort of accidents that happen in the factory, but on the farm. I'll be back then with you and yours tomorrow, 12 noon.